Okay, I'm intrigued about the ways in which you could read Metroid in terms of trauma, the relationships between Metroid and trauma, because of specifically, I suppose, the ways in which the Samus's descent down into the core of a planet. I mean, this happens in main Metroid games at the beginning. The center of the planet, to me, always seems like the center of the psyche or something, and Samus is descending down to the center. It feels like a confrontation with something scary and dark, and follows those typical rules of fairy tale logic, where you're going to meet with something at the very center of a deep dark place, and that's a scary place where you confront like this scary thing. So the whole game feels like you're technical problems. Anyway, the whole game is like you're descending to something that's more and more difficult to see and to find, I suppose, right? Things become more difficult. And Samus is, like, it's interesting because then, of course, what Samus meets there is the head. It's the brain. And the whole game seems to have something to do with the head, because Metroid, the word Metroid, refers to these creatures who suck your brain energy or something. They attach to your head, and they seem to feed off your head. Whatever they're doing, they end up killing you. So one would assume they're feeding off your brain, right? Whatever's in your head. And so they feed off your brain. And then the brain is a central object that seems to be important to this game. The brain is in the center of the game. That even more gives it a feeling of brain stuff, that you're dealing with something relative to the brain or to the head, and exploring the head. Now, of course, another issue here is Samus's face is covered. The whole game is centered on this idea, because at the beginning of the saga, there was this idea that if you completed the game under certain conditions, you would see Samus more and more naked throughout the game, like the better you completed the game. So that's a little odd, because it's as if Samus's nakedness is important to the game. It's an important issue, whether she is covered with a shell, protected or not. And of course, Mother Brain is also protected by a shell. She's protected by a shell of glass, but also she's protected by layers and layers and layers of planet. Like, there's planet above her. Mother Brain is covered by all sorts of layers of planet. You need to go down all the different layers of the big planet. I can't remember its name. And once you uncover all the layers, in the center you find this naked brain under a glass container. And even then, the brain is protected. It has it's spiky, right? So you are descending towards nakedness. You're sort of trying to find the most naked place on this planet. It's the place where you've gotten rid almost of the entire body to the bare essentials. The brain is often in our culture considered like the bare essentials. There's always this idea of a brain in a jar is how we see our culture. Like, the idea of a brain in a jar, the idea of consciousness or everything that we're living through being possible just through a brain in a jar, right? That's an idea that's very present in our culture, that the sort of almost solipsistic idea that you need nothing else. The core essentials are held in the brain. So it's as if you are going down, culturally, you could consider it as you're going down to the bare essentials of a person, of personhood, life experience, consciousness, whatever you want to call it. You're going down to these bare essentials and getting rid of all the layers that were covering this and the different layers of protection. I mean, Mother Brain is even protected literally by like little security windows. You have to pass through these barriers. You go through different checkpoints. So you are really, the game is about clearing obstacles that are protecting something very vulnerable, because a brain is a very vulnerable kind of thing. It's just a squishy, sort of wet, soft thing that is being protected by all these other things. And then simultaneously, Samus is covering her body up again and again and again, because the whole idea of the game actually is that you sort of crash land on this planet, I think. And I'm not speaking about any specific game. I think this happens in at least a few of the Metroid games. You crash land and you lose all your gear. So you used to be a very well-equipped body that had all sorts of different protections and layers on top of it. But all these layers get spread out across the planet. So in some words, you start the game naked. Not naked in the flesh, but naked in the very bare essential suit that Samus can wear. And so you're trying to recover your entire suit. You're trying to get more and more clothed, more and more covered by layers. But in order to do that, you need to descend to the depths of this planet. So the deeper you descend, the more covered in layers you are, until you're your final ultimate incarnation, which is covered in a lot of different layers of suit. But it's precisely at that point where you find Mother Brain, which is the ultimate uncovering of layers. It's as if the more covered in layers you become, the less covered in layers Mother Brain becomes, and there is a strange symmetry between you and Mother Brain. Another sort of symmetry between you and Mother Brain that is interesting, and I really think the game is playing with at least Super Metroid, I think, is that there's this whole like Jesus sort of idea where you become a mother figure to a lone surviving Metroid. This lone surviving Metroid baby, I think it's specifically a Metroid baby, seems to grow some sort of attachment to you. And if I remember correctly, this is what saves you in the end, because this Metroid's attachment to you, later when this Metroid has grown up, it comes back to save you. So in some way you have this mother bond to this Metroid. It's a baby Metroid. The game's already playing with the idea of a baby, and therefore you are a parental figure. And the fact that you're a mother to this baby, and then fighting a mother brain in the jar, I think is also important or interesting, resonant in some way with this game. So this symmetry is interesting also because, so it means that the deeper you go, the closer you get to Mother Brain. The closer you get to Mother Brain, you are paradoxically getting more and more clothed, while simultaneously getting her more and more naked. So there seems to be like a feedback between you and Mother Brain, between Samus and Mother Brain. In your descent down to Mother Brain, you pass through a lot of different areas. Thinking now of Super Metroid mainly, but I think the original Metroid too, you pass through different areas that are distinct meteorologically, or like in terms of its nature elements. They follow the similar patterns to the idea of the four elements. You've got a water world, you've got a fire world, you've got a vegetation, sort of green plant world, and then you've got like a Turian is like a robotic metallic world, maybe. I think these might be some of the, at least some of the most striking kind of distinctions between the worlds are the distinctions between the elements. You go from water to fire to greenery to metal, nature to technology. These transitions from one side to the other echo this idea of the matter, I suppose, nature. You're transitioning through nature in order to reach this brain that seems to sit at the center of it all, at the center of nature, at the center of all these different four elements that you've encountered or have been traveling down. Super Metroid, I think, at least, plays with the idea also of... Oh, I want to mention about mothers also, that Metroid 2 also plays with the theme of a mother who sits at the center of the earth. You've got the Queen Metroid. Metroid Queen is, I suppose, posited as some sort of a like a queen bee or a queen ant, I suppose, like the idea of like the mother figure to all of the different creatures who live on that planet, all the different creatures who live there. And so she is also a mother who's at the center of the planet in a deep cave, right? A deep dark cave in the center. So you need to go from the surface. Samus always starts at the surface of the planet and descends down to the center. And then the center, at least in 2 games, meets this sort of mother archetype, mother figure sort of thing. Or at least, like, let's say, a paternal figure of some kind. Archetypally, a mother is someone who has a relationship with a child or who gives birth to a child, again, like, archetypally. So mother and child are formed like a pair symbolically. So child is important here also as a symbol. And one wonders, what is Samus's relationship to all this? To what extent is she child? To what extent is she mother? To all of this, all of these issues. I think it may be important to note that the Metroids, I think, are being studied by humans for their healing properties. They seem to cure all illnesses, or seem to be like a miraculous medicine that people are interested in studying. And so people study these Metroids, and something terrible happens, I suppose. One of them escapes, or there's an accident, and they, I guess, the Metroids are leaked out into the world or something. But so I think it's sort of strongly implied that this is an elixir of life kind of idea. The Metroids would be the kind of medicine that would solve all problems for humanity, like eternal energy, eternal health. They would probably cure death, like a sort of philosopher's stone sort of idea. They would cure all possible wrongs. That kind of thing. And of course, interestingly, the Metroid itself heals by sucking your brain, by sucking your heads. So it's as if the Metroid's own source of life comes from your head. And the head is what rests at the center of the planet. At the very center of the planet, which is what Samus is exploring. Samus is descending in order to find this central head that is in the center of the planet. Again, I think aligned with these ideas that were probably prevalent in the science fiction of that time, of brains in jars, and the idea that the world could be, life, everything could be the dream of a brain in a jar. It feels as if what Mother Brain is the brain at the center of the jar, who's dreaming up the entire world that you're living in. So you're descending down into the depths of whatever it is that you're imagining, the world that you're seeing, the world that Samus is seeing. You're going deep into the center of that, where that world of imagination, that imagined world, is being originated at somehow. And so it suggests, I think, maybe that if that's the source of life of the Metroids, and the Metroids have this eternal source of life, it suggests that this eternal source of life has something to do with the head and with the brain, and therefore maybe with the imagination, dreaming, and whatever it is that the head does, perceiving. What does a brain in a jar do? Does it move its arms? Does it kick a bottle? Or in the brain in a jar science fiction ideas, does it imagine it's kicking a jar? Does it imagine it's doing things and fighting things? So if that's the case, then what the brain is posited to do archetypally is more perceive. Right? This is not entirely so, right? I mean, scientifically speaking, but I mean that in these science fiction ideas, I think there is an emphasis on the brain as a dreaming machine that only perceives things and whose role is mostly that of a perceiver. Mother Brain, at least in Super Metroid, once you confront her, she opens this big central Cyclops eye in the center of her face or her brain, so that she is also associated then with a big eye, a very big, all-seeing sort of staring eye that even shoots at you. I think she shoots lasers out of the eye. So seeing things is here an enormous, powerful kind of task. Perception becomes something big, ominous, and almost dangerous. Powerful. There is a power in seeing and perceiving. And it also suggests that descending to the center of the planet is to perceive whatever is there. Whatever is there is to be perceived. In fact, it was hidden by layers and layers and layers of clothes, right? It was hidden, so you couldn't see it. The whole of Metroid is almost like a quest in order to see something that was hidden. But then somehow, in order to see that thing that is hidden, Samus needs to protect herself with all sorts of layers and layers and layers of clothes. Or maybe you could see it this other way. It's not that she needs to do this in order to protect herself, but that the act of getting closer to the thing that you want to see is the act of protecting yourself. So that getting closer to this thing grants eternal life, grants health, right? That if the Metroids is associated to the brain and to whatever healing comes from a contact with the brain, then it means somehow that the closer Samus gets to the source of this power, the more this implies a protection of herself. The closer she gets to Turian, the closer she gets to being her complete self. And of course, I think she dies and then is resurrected. I think the Metroids resurrect her. So the idea of the Metroid being a source of eternal life is very clearly displayed there, or it's a part of the story. And so, right, it feels as if we're descending down to see something that was not supposed to be seen. It was hidden from sight. This brain, this big mother brain, this big mother brain. If big mother brain had something to do with Samus, if Samus is the archetype here of the mother in some way to the Metroids, then she seems to be getting close to something that pertains to an archetype that she partakes of. She partakes of the archetype of the mother, which is the archetype that seems to be embodied or exemplified by Mother Brain. So she's meeting something maybe that Samus is meeting something that she herself is being embodied as by someone in some way, right? In this case, maybe like I'm thinking of these issues of perception here mainly. I think we need to crack this code of perception that Samus herself, her face obviously is covered, and that's one of the main reasons why you can't really see her and get a sense that you are knowing her. The whole mystery of the Metroid games was, who is Samus? What is Samus like, right? And then that's what the game considers that a prize. So the game considers it a prize to reveal who Samus is. And the first thing that is revealed is Samus's head or face. So you can look at her in the eyes, kind of thing. Indeed, right, in fact, her eyes are one of the most clearly covered things. She wears this big black visor thing that turns her eyes into one single big eye on her head, like Mother Brain's, but one that is dark. We can't see it. It's we as viewers or players can't see into her eyes. They're locked under this dark grid on her face. Of course, then, this implies the players. Right? The game is also about us seeing something that we couldn't see before and having to descend into deeper and deeper, darker problems and difficulties, right? The game gets more and more difficult the deeper you descend, but in order to descend, you need to see things, and you need and again, things relative to nature in some way. It seems as if nature is a part of this. The planet seems to show different kinds of ecosystems. Again, a water ecosystem, a dark, cavey, lava one, and so on. There's different kinds of ecosystems, different kinds of natural settings. There's even, again, artificial, let's say, technological settings. There's technology, there's nature, there's all sorts of different kinds of ecosystems. And these sorts of ecosystems then carry with them all sorts of different environments. So Mother Brain seems to have something to do with this, I think, with the descent of nature. In order to meet Mother Brain, you need to descend through descend through all these different layers of nature, meet them all, meet all these different layers of the world. It feels as if what Mother Brain is something that exists underneath. No matter what the natural setting is, she exists underneath them all. She exists under ice and under fire, under plants and under technology, under desert and under whatever, space. So Samus needs to descend under all these things, under leaves, grass, fire, water. She needs to get under every single element of nature on this planet to get under all of them and perhaps get to the source from which all of them seem to emerge. And this seems to paint a kind of solipsistic picture in which what we're dealing with here is the brain as being the one who sits underneath all these things. So it feels as if what Samus is doing in some way is exploring the psyche that perceives the colors of the green leaves and the colors of the blue waters and the textures of the waters and the smells of the gases in the fire. It's as if all these different elements of nature are being perceived by this brain, and we're getting down into the brain that perceives nature in some way. Samus needs to meet her psyche, the depths of her psyche that are underneath everything in the world. Everything that she's experiencing, let's say, right? And this psyche, this meeting with the psyche, is a scary encounter, is an encounter with something scary, difficult to encounter, very, very difficult to sort of get close to somehow, under a lot of different layers. And I think that perception that does not want to be perceived is the basis of trauma in some way. Things that are locked down deep in the brain, in the psyche, but that they're locked in very, very deeply and become very difficult to see, to see clearly. But that, however, meeting them is the source of healing, right? In some way, these things, when they're locked down deep, they belong to all sorts of unconscious patterns that then fuck up your life, so that meeting them becomes a healing point. It brings this eternal health that the metroid is bringing. But this eternal health comes from the process of meeting something very difficult that in fact you don't want to meet, and that in some way hurts you to meet, right? It kills Samus. Samus has to confront this, dies in the process of confronting it, and is reborn from the process of confronting it, thanks to her loving kind of friendship, her loving relationship to the child, the son, somehow, right? So there's this also like this theme reminiscent of different world religions here. This issue of the friendship with the child is interesting also because one wonders, right, if you're becoming friends with some sort of a spiritual child, it also kind of evokes the idea that this child is not Samus's child, it's Samus's spirit child in some way. It is a child who, like, if Samus is exploring the past, let's say, if these issues are issues that belong to the past and are deep down in the brain, then they might have to do precisely in a psychotherapeutic sense with issues related to one's own childhood. And here, befriending one's childhood, and that could perhaps have something to do with the process that's at play here. It's a process of befriending one's childhood, befriending one's child, one's own child, oneself as child, who is forgotten in the depths of the brain and has not been encountered for a long time, has been precisely repressed and forgotten.